a lot of companies are trying to get to that point, but they have to use technology to do so, right? And then that kind of flips into well, how do you do that? How do you become transparent in technology? Like from an engineering standpoint, well, what I'm building, there's some intellectual property, there's some secret sauce in there to be able to do this. Okay, what from an engineering standpoint should be transparent to both the public and to the company?
Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Scaling Tech Podcast. I am Debbie Madden, your host, and today I am very, very excited to talk to Josh Tatum. Hey Josh, how you doing?
Doing well, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you so much for being here. Before I introduce you, I just want to tell everyone what we're talking about. So we're talking about transparency in technology, specifically what should be hidden, what shouldn't be hidden, and what's expected. What are the expectations? So I'm really excited to dive in because I know you have a lot of thoughts. So who is Josh? So Josh, for almost 2 decades, has been a driving force in the consumer, finance, and technology industries. He is the co-founder and chief product officer of Carputty, and there he's been instrumental in modernizing the auto financing and ownership with a focus on increasing transparency and consumer control. Very relevant to this conversation. With a proven track record of success in launching startups, advising executives, and raising capital, Joshua believes in bringing technology that optimizes ease of use for consumers. So with that background in mind, I appreciate you being here, and I want to jump into the definition because when you and I first spoke before we started recording this episode, we were talking about what does this even mean, this topic of transparency in technology. It does mean different things to different people. So tell us more. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to different groups?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the time today. So I link technology and transparency as 2 of the key elements in what I call the T triangle, which is technology, trust, and transparency. I look at it 2 levels. One is on the consumer side, people who actually engage with technology. And then also on the user side, user as the engineer side of, how it's built, why it's built. And we can talk about the consumer side first, because that's what most people are engaged with is like, hey, how is what I give different tech companies being utilized? Why is it being utilized? And how do I know I'm not being discriminated against or my stuff being sold, right? So we'll dive right into that. So, with my background mostly in consumer finance, one of the biggest questions that has come up for almost 20 years is, well, how do you give consumers debt? Like, how is money given to people that want to do something with it? Buy a house, buy a car, refinance their credit card, buy out their student loans. That's how we started at SoFi. And the question always remains is, well, you have to trust the technology that's available, which is credit reporting agencies. Well, there's the dilemma. Do consumers really know where credit reporting agencies are gathering their data? Is that transparent enough? Now, you can get your report for free. You can, get some things for free. But knowing actually what they do with it would actually scare a lot of consumers. And one thing we did...
But now I want to know. So tell me. Yeah, I want to know.
Well, I mean, credit reporting agencies, they sell your data all over the place. As a business, I can go to any of the big 3 and say, hey, I want to hyper-target. That's a key buzzword. And I want this type of consumer and this demographic and this geographic region. I want to market to them for whatever product. And for a few dollars per person, you can get that. Well, do consumers know that? Is it transparent enough that, hey, when I allow a vendor, a debtor to say that they have debt against me to a credit reporting agency, that will be used to market to me? No, I guarantee you probably 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 of consumers don't know that. But should they? So that goes back to the question of, well, what happens if they do know that? Does it change habits? Well, the credit reporting agencies would tell you, well, it could, because if we tell them everything, they'll stop getting debt with those that report. And that's where the divide has come in the industry is, well, do debtors have to report to credit bureaus? And the answer is no, they don't have to. It is an option. Now, some of the investors would push them to and say, hey, you need to do that for, fair credit lending, all that fun stuff. Well, there's a gray area of, is that legal? Do you have to force someone to report? And a lot of companies don't report. That's why you see like these boost things like, oh, well, we want to be more transparent with consumers. Let's boost your score by adding things like your cell phone bill, your light bill. Well, that's great. But all that does is link in other debts that credit reporting agencies normally don't have. So they know more about you, right? Because that's the end game for them is like, can I give a picture of Debbie? Can I tell, ABC Bank that Debbie is this? She is a high net worth person. She lives in, New Jersey, New York, whatever, California. She's moved 8 times in 6 years. She goes to Starbucks every day and she spends this. That's what consumers of this data want. They want the profile. And that's probably the largest conversation I have is around, okay, who owns that? And transparency, in the era of transparency and trust, who is trusted with that information, right? Is it the government? Is it the credit reporting agencies, which are private companies? Or is it the consumer? And there are companies out there that are trying to give it back to the consumer. I can speak of one, FinLocker. They're a company out of, I believe, Michigan that say, hey, consumer, we're going to give you a token. And inside that token, inside that locker is all of your financial information. You own that. That is you. And you tell us when you want to give that away. And we will sell that on your behalf. And that's something that's quite interesting is, well, can consumers monetize?
So, okay. So there's the minimum bar of what's legal, what's required in terms of transparency, right? For the consumer. And then when you make the leap to companies trying to give back consumers their control over within the legality, now you're getting into the people that you said you had to trust the technology. So now we're putting this role of determining what ought to be transparent into the hands of the technology executives to determine what do they expect. So, right, isn't that the next layer? Like, okay, what must be done? What can and cannot be done? And then within that, before we even get to the consumer or the engineer building the code, we have this other group of people that are almost like this another layer of gatekeeping almost. Do you think, is that the right way to think about it, or is that not the right way to think about it?
No, I think it's the right way. Because at the end of the day, the leaders, the founders of the company dictate what is, brought down. Like, okay, here's what we absorb, right? And that's one thing I will say at Carputty. When we started Carputty, my co-founder and I, we looked at the process of how consumers get auto debt, which is through like a dealership. And over 80% of all loans are done through that method, where somebody physically goes, fills out an application on a piece of paper and says, hey, here's some basic information about me. Give me money to buy a car. Well, what's not transparent is, okay, well, that dealer then sends that off and they get, 8, 9, 10 quotes and they pick the best one for them financially. Say, okay, well, ABC Bank will give us, $500 for this customer, for Debbie. Oh, but XYZ Bank will give us $625. Oh, we're going with $625. So they present that to the consumer. That's not very transparent, right? The consumer just sees one offer, one thing. But if the transparency was there, they say, no, we did 8. Here's all 8. Customer, you pick what's best for you. And that does happen. That's not illegal either. So you talk about legality and then executive level, they found that loophole of saying, well, we don't have to. It's not illegal. We don't want to. We want high profit. But then the consumer gets, the bad side of that, transaction of like, well, I get one offer. I don't really know what really the transparent rate or terms that I qualify for are. And then you lose trust. And obviously there's, possibility for discrimination, which is an evil word in that transparency. It's like the opposite of transparency. No, I'm going to discriminate you based on your data. So at Carputty, we basically said, okay, bunk all of that. Everyone's treated the same. You get a margin, and the margin is fixed. And so, what we look at is, do you have the ability to repay this loan? We look at all kinds of data, not just your credit report, not just your income. We look at a lot of different factors and say, okay, you can repay this, Debbie. So we're going to give you this just as everyone else in your criteria. This is your margin. It's the same. It doesn't change. And it's margin plus a index, which is SOFR. So customers can see like, okay, it's transparent. Like you gave me this, I qualified for this. It's the same for everyone. And no matter what I buy. So a lot of companies are trying to get to that point, but they have to use technology to do so, right? And then that kind of flips into well, how do you do that? How do you become transparent in technology? Like from an engineering standpoint, well, what I'm building, there's some intellectual property, there's some secret sauce in there to be able to do this. Okay, what from an engineering standpoint should be transparent to both the public and to the company, right? And that's a whole different gambit of, okay, we have very smart people building really cool things. Do consumers, do companies, do the investors of the companies, are they really in the know? Like, should they be? If I have an amazing engineer who can write, amazing code, high quality software, do I need to force that person to tell me why and how he did that? Maybe, right? If it works for the company and it's something that's value to the company, but you still have to give them a little bit, be transparent with them. On the flip side, say, well, you transparent with me, I'm gonna be transparent with you with how we're using your code. Because that's in my tenure here, I will say a lot of engineers leave companies because they feel what they've built, they don't really know what it's used for. And it's kind of a friction point. So there's transparency on the consumer level, there's transparency on the executive level of why, and then there's transparency on the builder level, right? And they all form another triangle. And to your point, is like, who's the gatekeeper of what?
Right. There's multiple along the way, right? And then now you're talking about many to many relationships, because you can have expected behaviors, you can have team culture, but at the end of the day, everyone's just an individual person with their own belief system, with their own technical ability. Now we layer in generative AI, which makes it more complicated. And so you are in the middle of this very interesting conversation in one industry, right? Consumer focused, having to do with financial lending and things of that nature. But where in this ecosystem do you sit? Do you believe that it's on the onus of the engineers, the technology leaders to maximize the transparency that as much as the technology can provide? Do you disagree with that? You've been very good about telling me what's possible, but whatever you're willing to share about, what's your thoughts on this?
So personally, my opinion is, I believe that all people should know what they're giving and what it's being used for, right? So if I tell you my name is Joshua, great. But you tell me back, well, Joshua, great, I got your name. I'm going to use it for this. That's transparent. I build trust. I think that whatever you build has to convey trust with whoever the end user is, whether it be a consumer, whether it be a company, whatnot, while still maintaining your intellectual property of saying, okay, I don't necessarily have to tell you how I did that. I'm going to tell you what I'm doing with it. That is kind of my core mission statement of if I give you something, I'm telling you why I'm giving it to you, how I got it, right? How I got to that number. But I don't have to tell you what the secret sauce was to get to that why and how.
Right. I can't off the top of my head think of all of the edge cases of to blanketly say I wholeheartedly agree or disagree, but my gut is telling me that makes logical sense, right? Because the trouble becomes is when people proactively try to like pull the wool over the consumer's eyes, right? Oh,
Uh-huh.
don't, we're not going to tell them it doesn't matter. It does matter, right?
Hmm.
Like whether or not someone proactively seeks out all the knowledge that's available to them, that's on the consumer. But I do believe it's on the shoulders of the builders, of the people using the power of the technology to share the rules of the game, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I'll give you one not
right?
in my industry that I know of, without saying names. A very large grocery chain provider, go to the grocery store. They utilize a simple technology, Bluetooth, to know how you go through the grocery store, what aisles you hit most, what levels of the aisles, what shelves you stop at, and what you buy, right? Nowhere is that ever talked about when you walk in. No sign says, hey, Debbie, if you have your Bluetooth on, we're utilizing that to show you the best deals, coupons, and also maybe advise you on what to buy later. But they do every day.
Right.
And that's, and people scratch their heads, well, gosh, I'm getting these coupons at checkout that just, how do they know that I need this?
Right. They know. Right.
They know.
Yeah.
To me, that is the anti-transparency, and that is what I am not for, right?
Right.
Because that goes against my trust factor. I don't trust you now, right? Because you didn't share with me what you're doing with my information. I own my cell phone. That is my personal property. So if you're utilizing something that is my personal property, at least inform me that you're doing so I can make a conscious decision whether to allow it or disallow it.
Right. And I think for me personally, when things like that happen, where you're like, oh, I was just talking about this thing and now I'm getting an ad for it, it's happening and you don't know how it's happening, but then you also wonder what else don't you know about? And then you just kind of go about your day because it's too much. You feel like, all right, if I start to chase this down, I'm just gonna get, more anxious, and I'm gonna. But at the end, but again, that's where it's like the consumer only has so much time in their day, but it is really this partnership that can, there's consequences, right? Consumer data in aggregate and individually. So being involved in transparency when it comes to data and technology for so long, and being a technology executive, a co-founder, is there anything that you like, a lesson learned or a mistake you made where you're like, oh, if I only would have known that 10 years ago or last week?
Daily, yesterday. Yeah, I mean,
Like, what are the
obviously.
biggest lessons? Like, you have all this wisdom that you've built up throughout your experiences, but what lessons have you learned that you can share with us?
Yeah, two of the biggest lessons I've learned in life. One, always question the why.
Yeah.
And when I was in the mortgage industry, I worked for a very large bank for a little bit, and then a very large mortgage company. And as a technologist, they gave me the underwriting guidelines. They, well, here's Fannie and Freddie's, the government-backed entities of how we're supposed to do things. I never questioned the why. All I did was take that and say, okay, these are business requirements, and now I've got to build something to those. Well, years later, I found out those requirements or those guidelines change sometimes on a weekly basis because people do question, and leaders go back and say, well, why are we doing it this way? Why is this data needed versus this data? And I wasn't the person to do that, even though in my head I was like, this doesn't feel right. So that was definitely lesson number one, is always question, always ask the why. The second lesson I learned is really from the engineering side, which is back to trust, is trust your engineers. Building things quick, trying to hyper scale. Sometimes you forego the thought process of a solid engineering leader, especially when it comes to data and transparency. Of like, well, hey, if we build this data set, if we have this data warehouse of consumer information, hey, Joshua, I don't know if it's super secure enough to where we want to store 100% of everything we get into there. Let's delegate that out. lesson learned. Sometimes in the era of transparency, it is better to slow hyperscale and actually do things the right way the first time. So those are the two big lessons I've learned in my life when it comes to
those are really great. And to respond to the first one, when I start to work with a client, right, we're being invited into their homes, right, into their technology stacks, into their tech teams, and we always ask about why they exist as a company, right? So that's Stride asking the why. And I've been doing this 20 years. And one time, someone looked me in the face and said, "You don't need to know that." And in that moment, I was like, I don't understand exactly quite why this doesn't sit well with me. But reflecting over that conversation, I over the years have gained clarity. And when what you're saying now just reminded me of it, right? It's questioning the why and then listening to how the person you ask responds, all right? Because there's only so much one individual can do. It's about the culture of the person being asked, embracing, like, thank you for asking, right? Let's have that conversation. And so I love that. And then certainly on the engineering side, I have a feeling that your message is going to resonate, especially now when companies are being, due to external factors, like forced to slow down. Whereas, last year and the year before, they were forced to go as fast as they could, right? And there's always that balance. And I think regardless of the external factors, you really have to prioritize like what's best for your team, what's best for the consumer. The transparency is to really take a measured approach, is what I heard you say.
Exactly. Agreed.
Yeah. No, I love both of those things. Well, sadly, we're out of time, but this has been a really good conversation, and I can't believe how fast the time went. So thank you so much for being here, and I think we've all definitely learned a lot about transparency, about your take on it, and some of the different kind of gates and the guardrails that happens to the consumer on a daily basis that we may not stop to think about all the time.
I know. I appreciate your time, and definitely, this flew by. So
yes, absolutely. And in the show notes, we'll have some information about how to find Josh and more about Carputty and all those great things. And thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Bye.